And we're live. Good morning, St. Paul's. I'm here today with two of our musical guests. No, they're on hiatus from their tour, singing in the choir right now, sadly. But we're here with Kara and Karen McShane. Thanks for joining us today. And so I guess where I want to start off with today is I've heard it a couple times in some of the different forums or groups where we're all meeting, and I'll hear it always as a joke where you'll say, "Hey, we're some of the newest people at St. Paul's." You've been here what, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. Five. Okay.
I think this is your 5. We've lived in the area for 6.
Yes.
So about
5, yes.
Okay, so about 5.
About 5, yeah.
Which, I mean, in a place as historic as St. Paul's, I could see how that could be considered newcomers. I mean, the other weekend was baptizing someone who was like 4th or 5th generation at one place, which I'm like, this is amazing. Yeah. But so you all are newer in the life of St. Paul's. And so what was it that attracted you to St. Paul's, and how did you end up here?
All right, so it's kind of a long and funny story, so I'll try to be brief. We moved to the Philadelphia area from Rochester, New York in 2015. And in Rochester, we were at a St. Paul's. And when we were talking as we were leaving, somebody suggested, somebody suggested St. Paul's.
It was our assistant music director.
So somebody suggested St. Paul's in Chestnut Hill, and we're like, okay, well, we don't know if we want to go into Philadelphia.
We were living in Royersford at the time, so it was an hour and
it was a good drive.
A little bit of a hike, yeah, Royersford, yeah.
So we tried out all of the little churches closer to where we were living for a year, and nothing felt right. And when I got the job teaching in the school district of Philadelphia, we were like, well, I'm going to be driving into Philadelphia every day for work anyway. Why don't we look in Philadelphia for churches? And Kara, having a research degree, went online and, okay, where could we go? And of course, I mean, for fairly obvious reasons, we don't want to walk in just anywhere. Two women living together, it can get a little weird.
Some places it did.
And some places it did. And so she wanted to find places that were accepting of LGBTQ people. And St. Paul's was, I think, the first one in the city that we went to. And we were immediately drawn in by the choir. Like, as you joked, we are singers. And the beautiful sound from the organ, the beautiful sound coming from the choir. I'm pretty sure that both of us actually watered up and were crying because it was so moving.
I was weeping.
But it was so moving because none of the churches that we had been to in, the Royersford Collegeville area had that quality of music. And I guess I don't even know how it happened, but
it was the first week. We happened to be there the first week that our refugee family had arrived. And so as the choir sort of kept coming down the aisle, and we sort of, wait, maybe this is it. And I'll never forget Valerie Stevens standing up and saying, our family is here, they've just arrived, they need things. And from where I was sitting, I looked and saw probably 6 or 7 people rifling through bags, grabbing checkbooks, making notes. And to me, that was the moment when I said, both of the things that are most important to us are here. Right? There's a community engagement here, as well as the music piece. And to be fair, Zach Hemingway then sent Renee Walcott to find us after the service.
Yeah, so apparently he caught us singing while he was processing with the choir, and immediately sent an ambassador to try to draw us in. So it was kind of a perfect storm of the music and the outreach, I guess, that brought us there. And, you know, immediately being flags like, hey, you're singers, why don't you come and sing with the choir? It helped us immediately be part of the community.
And one of the things that I alluded to this, sometimes it gets weird when you're a couple walking into church, and we're also millennials, which means we stand out for two immediate reasons. We're under 40, and we're a young couple, and we're a couple that sort of makes you feel good and inclusive. And at many churches, that led to people being like, oh, I know a lesbian. Here, look at pictures of somebody you've never seen before's wedding. It led to sort of oversharing in an attempt to be inviting. And one of the things I so appreciated was that one week, Manny, who was the assistant at the time, sort of came up to us and said, you know, you're not the only couple like you here. It's just that a lot of them have families and are at the 9 o'clock service. And because that's something that's long-term, a desire and a goal and hope of ours, we said, oh, there's space for not only us now, but for whatever form our family takes down the road here. So very quickly, that sort of immediate knee-jerk response came to be validated.
That's so cool, because it wasn't just that you could connect with the church in the present, but you could see yourself there in the future.
Yeah.
And that's a really helpful, I think it can be tough, especially if we've been in the pews a long time at a church. We don't think about, wow, maybe prospective churchgoers are thinking about, can they have years long here? Because everyone moves around so much a lot these days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's something probably that's really important to keep in mind as we're shaping the future of our church. What does it look like for people who want to put roots down here?
Yeah, and it was nice for us. The decision to leave Rochester was hard. And it was for me, it was my position. I did a national job search and wound up at Ursinus College. And we had some serious conversations about, is it even worth taking this job? Right, knowing we have to leave this community that had held us up and been very dear to us. So it was so wonderful and important to find that for now and for the future. This is my third St. Paul's, so you'd think I'd get a clue. I grew up at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Rhode Island, Saget, Rhode Island, and then Rochester, and so now we're here.
Well, and I think that's so cool for the church to be, you know, kind of a community that helps people through transitions in their lives, regardless of, you might be switching churches, but as an institution, it's kind of helping people navigate all the complexities of that. And right now we're in a really tough time where even the church itself is in transition because of COVID. So how has St. Paul's been able to help during this COVID transition? And what are some resources from your own faith experience that have been helpful? Or maybe what's been hard about being a person of faith during COVID-19?
You're gesturing at me.
I talked the most last time.
I think that for me, when I say I'm a cradle Episcopalian, my parents took me home on Friday and they took me to church on Sunday. So for me, the church has been.
And her grandmother baptized her.
Yeah, my grandmother was an Episcopal priest, so she baptized me. I was her first baptism in 1985.
That's cool.
So I was expected to be the third, fourth generation in my Rhode Island place. That's not where life and grace and everything took me. One of the things that has been really powerful, I think, is that we mobilized stunningly quickly as a parish community. I mean, we missed, choir was canceled on Thursday, and Sunday there was a live stream service, at which the wonderful band provided. But it was for our first virtual Eucharist, it was the first live stream. And so, and I think in some ways, like the fact that we've been adaptable, right? That we're changing, that as this moves from sort of a temporary solution to something that we need to grapple with in the longer term, our willingness to be flexible and creative, and our sort of deep prioritizing of safety and comfort for folks as we try to navigate, how do we come back, how do we not, For whom is it a good idea? For whom, right? Are the alternate ways of engaging most useful right now? That's been really important. And I think it's worth saying that it's not been universally the case for any church or for the Episcopal Church. So my folks, I keep joking about this, but for a while we had a satellite location in Salt Lake City, Utah, because when their diocese closed, that was it. Nothing was offered by most of the parishes in their area. Wow. And my father is still quite furious. So I think that for me, and I don't know if this is partly generational or like I'm extremely online. So I indeed, because of the way that our lives have moved us, I'm invited to more opportunities for worship, and more space for prayer is held up in my life in COVID than ever has been before. A camp I was involved with once has compline 3 times a week. Our church in Rochester had sort of liturgy of the word available. Several other friends at their churches, the assistant mayor at Rochester has something. So for me, my faith has been present in a way that it was never as in your face. It's hard to be just a Sunday churchgoer when every time I hop onto Facebook, which I do more than I should, so is doing morning prayer. For whom can we pray today? Mm-hmm. So and so has compline at 8:30. You can tune in live or not. And so in some ways, I think our creativity has created different, but really important spaces for connection. One week we were at coffee hour, and I won't remember who it was, but 2 individuals had said, "Oh, I've never met you. You go to the 9 and I go to the 10:30, but I've seen your name on a lot of things," right? So we are not together in the ways that we value and have grown accustomed to, but we're not actually apart in every way. Which doesn't mean that Easter was not like the hardest thing. It was so, as somebody who's been like, I do the Triduum, we do all the services, we value all of that.
In fact, we found a virtual, what is it, the vigil?
There's a virtual vigil run through the National Church.
Yeah, so.
We did the whole thing. But it is weird, like making sacred space on your coffee table, right?
Yeah, it's such a, on the one hand, I think like being a millennial, there's like, oh, it's great that we can use our technology, and there's almost a comfort. It's like, okay, this is not the end of the world. I'm used to being online. And in some ways it's like, this is great. I kind of like this more online than I do in person. But there's other parts of it. I'm like, I'm in the Episcopal Church because I love the stuff, and I love that it's cranky and old, and it's not as tech savvy, and so it's this really weird kind of balance, I think, where there's definitely joys and losses. And I think one of the things you said that really resonated is it's created opportunities to kind of do musical chairs where people at different services can kind of swap around. Like we saw you, I think, at the 9 o'clock rectory on the lawn, or the coffee hour.
Yep.
But then there's also like we miss like singing in our community, especially like the choir, or we haven't had a lot of kids come to the 9 o'clock service because of like fears around COVID, which is understandable. And so it's like in some ways there's gains, but there's also a lot of loss, and it's a lot to dissect, I think.
And I think one of the challenges, and one of my big, are you going to turn the light on? Yes, thank you. One of the things that I think about is, who are we leaving behind, right? And no matter what our platform is, we're going to be leaving somebody behind, right? Somebody is not going to be fed in the way that they're used to. And for me, I think that spiritually, it's good to mix stuff up, right? I think it's important to do so, to worship in ways that we aren't used to, and to have experiences that aren't our week to week. But it is a moment when we could all do with a little more solace, right? And so to not have that in the ways that we're used to is challenging. I know there came a moment in the spring when we rearranged our house because everything existed in this box. Right, we were both teaching remotely. We were worshiping remotely. Choir was happening via Zoom. We speak to my parents via Zoom every week because they're 2,000 miles away. And I finally just said to Karen, I cannot live in this undifferentiated space, like where everything exists here on this couch and everything happens in the same way. And so much of our lived experience is about our spaces, right? Our sacred spaces, our sort of other ways of moving through space, right? My work normally necessitates a lot of travel. Here I am on my couch. So we lose that. And I hope we will think about and value those spaces differently, right? In a way that we perhaps never have when we're able to fully be back in them. Which doesn't mean it's the best not to be there, right?
Yeah, we really do wish that we could be there, and I'm sure a lot of people do. But we are so grateful for the alternate ways of worship that our community has developed in this time.
Yeah, it's like trying to make the best of, kind of a tough situation, and it does, I think, the silver lining, you're right, I think it does create a greater appreciation in some ways for the things that we already love dearly. Doesn't make it any less hard, but I do think that maybe, and hopefully there's some new creative energies in thinking about how do we do church differently, but not in a way that is completely kind of separated from what we were doing before. Yeah, I think that question you asked, who are we leaving out from the table, is such an important question for the Christian life. And I remember thinking, we have like this theology of embodiment and then this theology of inclusion. I'm like, it feels like they're pitted against each other right now. But then I was thinking about it, and in some ways, like, so we're like, oh, if you're online, it's disembodied. In some ways, it's a more embodied worship experience because you can actually sing at home, whereas at church, you can't sing if you're in the pews. Or, like, we had a couple of weeks where there were some homeless people and they don't have internet access. So actually the more inclusive was being in person. So it's kind of a strange thing where some of the categories are blending in weird ways. And yeah, we are thinking about space in totally different ways, I think.
And that's powerful, right? There's a new theology of embodiment, right? And what it means to be embodied. I think I have this fight with my dad. My dad has done education for ministry, AFM, and so he would say he's an amateur theologian, and I'm a medievalist by training, so am I. And we keep having this fight about virtual Eucharist, right? And can that be done, right? And what would that look like? Do you do like a drive-through? Do you consecrate it and have everyone attend virtually, and then do a drive-through after where you can go pick up your right? Or how do you do that? And I think it's a useful fight to have in terms of some of the creative energies in the church writ large, and also in how. I mean, also he's just picking a fight with me, but it allows us to think differently about what and how that means for us, right? And what do we prioritize, right? What is the essential community-based part of that experience? I think in some ways the church, I had this fight with Dad this weekend. One of the things that I don't like about contemporary American theology in a lot of churches is that I think in some ways we prioritize the individual too much. And the individual relationship is hugely important, but if we look at things like Acts, it's telling us how to live in community, right? So if we think differently about community and what the community experience is and who's involved and who's not, that's good. Mm-hmm. That is a good thing that comes out of this.
Yeah, it's forcing us to ask the questions again instead of taking it for granted. It's causing us like, oh, what have we been praying? How's it been shaping what we believe? And do we still believe this way? Because our prayer's changing. So are our beliefs going to change, like in some positive ways, maybe some not so positive ways? We're having, I don't know when this is going to air, but we are having someone come to an adult forum who is, his name is Dr. Kyle Schiffbon Guerrero, and he is a liturgy professor at the United Lutheran Seminary
Mm.
in on Germantown Ave, right down the street from us. I think he's living in California right now, but so he's going to be getting up early to be doing the call. But he's been doing a lot of talks lately on how is COVID-19 impacting the liturgy, and there's a lot of debates about Eucharistic theology and stuff. So hopefully, I'm going to use this as a plug for that. Come join us for that discussion. But speaking of embodiment, like a key part of being embodied, especially in Christian worship, is singing. So I think our choir is probably the greatest evangelist at St. Paul's. They get everyone in terms of people want to listen to the music, and then people join the choir, which is so great. I'm taking notes. I'm like, ooh, what are they doing? To think about how to be an
It's
evangelist.
an easy way to invite, like thinking about evensong. So if you have friends who may have fallen away from church going or not be sure about it, it's very easy to say, look, it's a prayer service. Mostly they're just going to sing. You should definitely come. I think that's how I got you to be in Episcopalian.
No, you brought me to your church on a Sunday, and they were like, "Oh, Carrie, you're here. Can you be the
Can you bring up
can you bring up the gifts?" And so I'm participating in a way that I have never done church before, because I was raised Catholic, and you didn't just walk in off the street and get asked to bring the gifts up. So like,
Episcopal Church welcomes you, babe.
Oh, that's so funny. I wasn't raised Episcopalian either. At my first Sunday, I was at the church, and the priest knew I was like a pastor in another denomination. He's like, throw this psalm on. And like, I'm walking through the liturgy, and I'm like, do I bow here? What do I do here? I'm like up front, like serve. I was totally not supposed to be a lamb, but it was a whole thing. So, but that's how people get involved. You start
Yeah.
participating, and then you're stuck. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, it was one Sunday, and then all of a sudden I'm back to sing tenor actually at the Easter Triduum. So
We were college 45 minutes away from my home parish, and we had a really wonderful choir with 0 tenors, and Karen can pinch hit, so she got looped in.
Yep. So
and all we had to do was feed you Easter dinner.
yeah. So I just I love to sing. I come cheap, I guess.
But like singing and embodiment, it's such an important. I think the choir is really important sort of ambassador for the church in the community, right? Like a lot of folks go to evensongs or to lessons and carols that wouldn't, I think, identify themselves as churchgoers, right? But are nonetheless taking something spiritual out of that. And one of the things that I so value about our choir, for me, right, there's such an important intergenerational component to that.
Yes.
And it's one of the places where we most clearly pull together a lot of the many generations at our church, right? Which doesn't mean that I still don't look around and go, many of you are older than me, many of you are younger than me, right? We are sort of part of that minuscule middle, but for me, that's part of the value in it.
Absolutely. And with our music program being made up of so many people, it does make it easier in some ways, I think, for us to then get involved in other ways, because you are talking with somebody, well, not right now, but you could previously talk with somebody during our in-person rehearsals, which feel like a forever ago thing.
Roughly one pandemic ago.
Yes. So, and we're doing this event, why don't you come with? Or, I'm on outreach. What do you think of this? Why don't you come to a meeting? And we got pulled in to other things through the choir, because I think very few people do just one thing. And in a group as large as the choir is, then you have representation from a lot of the other things that are happening at the church.
Yeah, because if you're wearing multiple hats, there's just so many people that might be wearing, oh, I'm wearing the outreach hat and the choir hat, or oh, I'm wearing, the the children's ministry hat and the choir hat, or
Yeah.
vice versa, you know.
So whatever it is, it's been a good way for us to experience. It was a good way into what ministry looked like at St. Paul's in a broader way than just sort of music ministry. As crucial and central as that is, I don't know a better way to pray than to sing. And part of my sort of cradle Episcopalianness, like they put me in a children's choir when I was in 3rd grade. Here I am 35. There have been some short periods where I have not sung in a church choir in my life, and I would identify almost all of them as dark for a variety of reasons. But I don't have for me, that is so crucial to the embodied part of my worship.
Yeah, and I think that's such a powerful thing, because you know, you hear this narrative of decline in the Episcopal Church quite a bit, but if you look at where is discipleship, you know, what is keeping cradle Episcopalians, and it tends to be the sacred music program. The kids that were singing, because I think there's just a lot more, you're singing with your whole being, so you're like, hey, God cares about my whole identity, who I am, everything about me, you know? And I think, too, just being exposed to the history, the tradition, all of it, you're really getting a whole education beyond just music. And the music is important, too, in and of itself. But I think it's probably our best discipleship, in terms of not that the goal is necessarily to keep people. Like, if you find something else that works for you, that's great. But I mean, hopefully we're keeping some people, because I think we're doing something good.
Yeah. And I think even in terms of scriptural and liturgical awareness, right? If you are in a choir, you're singing psalms, right? You're providing one of the readings weekly. That is part of scripture as it is shared on Sundays. You're through other sorts of texts, you're encountering a lot of the text that has had meaning for generations. And I think also, for me at least, the fact that it is corporate is equally important. It is not only my whole body, but I actually literally can't do it by myself.
Yes.
It is the ultimate sort of community expression of worship, right? I'm pretty good, but I can sing but one part at a time, right? Like, it's not, with us, we've got 2, maybe 3, but like, it's, you know, that in some ways serves for me as a microcosm of what it is that we think we do. Like, it requires the whole being. It requires a different way of intellectual engagement as well as physical engagement and spiritual engagement, and it necessitates being in community.
It really is an image for what the church is. It's a part of the church, but it's an image for the whole church. We're all singing in this big choir. We're all part of this orchestra and bring different gifts. And speaking of different gifts, and you know, the diversity of gifts, right now, you both have been involved in starting kind of a new ministry here at St. Paul's. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
No.
That's my girl. So I'll tell you about how I've accidentally done this. I hesitate to say leading, so I'll say facilitating an anti-racism reading group and learning community, with an end goal of action, of building our capacity for action toward equity and justice and inclusion in the church. So this started because I think a lot of folks were looking for something to do after the summer protests and the death of George Floyd. And as books started to be suggested, somebody suggested Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And I have taught it. I had taught it historically as it's part of the curriculum for our first year students at Ursinus. And I said, well, gosh, I could certainly start the Zoom call and talk to some folks about that and what it's like to read that and read it again, revisit it with folks. And as we started to wrap up the first book, it's been a really lovely core group of somewhere between around six,
yeah.
And everyone said, great, so what's next? And I went, I don't know, Tia, what's next? What do we want to read? What should we do? And so we picked another book and we kept going. And we're now starting tonight our third book, Isabel Wilkerson's Cast. So there's a way in which it's also part of my intellectual life. I am a medievalist, and my specialty is racial, religious, and ethnic difference in late medieval England and how it's presented in the literature of the time. So it felt like a way that I could tie a thing I feel deeply about to an expertise I have in a new way. And some of what has been powerful about it for me is bringing in a spiritual dimension, right, to work that it's been very easy to intellectualize. And equally, what's been powerful to me is that really I just start the Zoom call, that it's a community of folks who deeply want to engage and to think differently and think about ways that we might be differently. And I saw it in action a bunch of weeks ago. We were having one of our Zooms about the profile, as part of the profile process. And somebody said, well, one of our values is this inclusive, diverse community. And a member of that group piped up and said, well, I don't know, we're pretty white. And I just sort of sat in my hands. I was like, I don't have to do anything, right? Like that someone else can see this in a way that they may not have 4 weeks ago. And that there's sort of more folks doing the work.
And I mean, it's important. And somebody in our group, you know, we talk about doing the homework. And so somebody in the group says, well, we have to do more than just do the homework. And so I think that one of the things that's really powerful about it is this desire for it to be more than just a reading group. You know, we want to learn so that we can act. And it's really valuable. You know, I get to be a part of it because Kara sort of,
because it happens in your living room.
Because it happens in my, I get to be a part of it because Kara sort of accidentally started it, but you know, it's really good to hear the conversations and to be able to be part of the conversations. I am not a fast reader, so like I have trouble. So I'm absorbing it from the conversations that I'm hearing. And I have, you know, the last book that we read, I'm going to read it a little more slowly at my own pace. And I'll probably get into Cast 2 at some point. But I really love being able to be a part of this. And, you know, in one of the small ways that it is, I feel it doing something is that I can be a better colleague to my colleagues of color. You know, when we have difficult conversations at faculty meetings, I can speak up so that it doesn't always have to be my colleagues of color speaking up about these issues. And I think that, you know, it's just that is important. And I've had a couple of them, you know, thank me and for that. And it's a baseline human decency thing. And I was thinking about at one point the baptismal vow of respecting the dignity of every human being. And, you know, if we really believe that, then we all have an obligation to learn what we need to know so that we can respect them, so that we can live that.
When you were talking, you said that we need first to learn and then to act. And that's what we're called to do in the church writ large, right? Like no matter what the ministry happens to be, like there's both learning and action, right? And if you're going to live faithfully, you have to do both, right? Like it is not sufficient to just read your Bible or just show up on Sunday. We're called to go out into the world and do the work that God has given us to do, right? Yeah.
I think that's so cool because you've got, okay, it's already starting to impact St. Paul's in certain ways. You know, you were talking about someone speaking up in a group, and then you're talking about how it's impacting you at work. And I think that's hopefully, you know, everything that's happening with all of this kind of you know, consciousness that's happening in the larger society. It's not just a, oh, we got to go do it out in the world. As important as that is, our faith is impacting our work, but it's also like, how are we doing work within ourselves as a community? But then that can become real myopic, and you're not out in the world as well. And so hearing that balance, and I think, Karen, you really, I think it can be intimidating to think about, oh, I've got to read all these chapters every week, and you're like, no, 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 you can join the conversation if you're not a fast reader. And so I hope if anyone's watching you, and that's been the reason you haven't been involved, like, just know, like, it's okay.
We always have the overachiever. So when we were reading the young adult reader version of Abraham County's Stamped, which is going to your classroom when you're done with it, right?
Yes, so my students can read it.
I became the overachiever who was like, I'm also reading the very long version of Stamped from the beginning. And then I kept being like, well, in the other version, there's this too. It expands on that there. And
Somebody else read the long one too while we were doing the short one.
so there are a couple of us who are simply put nerds. We like the footnotes. But you needn't be. And wherever you're at, you're most welcome, I think, is part of it, right? That we're not, my expertise is in starting the Zoom help, right? I learn from those conversations, and that's how it should be.
Well, and you asked really good questions too, where you're a really gifted facilitator, where you're able to let people talk and explain, and can kind of direct the conversation without being overbearing. I think you're really good at that. And it's just, yeah, it's really exciting. And I've dropped in again, like, when I can, and there's always kind of a welcome. It's not like, oh, you haven't been here for a couple weeks or anything. It's kind of there is a core group, but there's also kind of, there's an open door
Yeah.
with that, which I think it's a really cool thing. I think what I'm encouraged to hear is, I know sometimes, like, what I've noticed, especially when people are volunteering in the church, sometimes people want to do something totally different from what their work life is, because they're like, I need something totally different. And there can be like, but people know that they have a certain skill set or something. They're like, oh man, I'm like using my skill set at work, but really I want to do something different. And what I'm hearing is that that's not the case. It's actually this life-giving thing for you to be able to incorporate your work and kind of what you're doing at church. And that makes me really happy to hear it's that kind of experience.
For me, in general, teaching is a form of ministry. I don't put it that way in my classroom, right? I teach in a secular classroom, but it always is, right? Like, and as we're called to respect the dignity of every human being, that applies to my students as much as it applies to everyone. And so it feels natural to take whatever facilitation skills I have are partly born of that expertise, right? Of that, I've been at it a while now, right? So it's nice to be able to pull those together.
Speaking of pulling things together, we're getting close to hopefully hiring our new rector, which will be pulling a lot of these different pieces over the last couple months, almost, I guess, year or so now. If there was any advice you could give to an incoming rector about St. Paul's, what would you give them? What if you're having coffee with them in this pre-COVID when you could do that? What would you let them know?
Again, I believe in us.
All right, so I think that the advice that I would give to the our potential, our newly arrived, yes, our newly arrived spiritual facilitator, I would say that we need to be thinking about ways to grow the church that don't involve assuming that everybody's going to stay at St. Paul's forever. And I say that because some of the conversations that I've heard have focused a lot on, the young people, and that is incredibly important, but the young people are going to go to college and they may not come back to Philadelphia. And so we really need to think about expanding from the outside. How do we draw people in? I've seen churches that just have a little rainbow flag on their sign. And seeing that, we were in Canada, Toronto, I think, and we were thinking about going to a church, and one of the churches that we walked past every day had that little rainbow flag on the sign. I'm like, okay, well, we know that we would be welcome there. Or, having more than just the hymnal. There are other songbooks that are more diverse, that would show that we care about that kind of music and the people who are fed by that kind of music. So small signs. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I would encourage the newly arrived rector, to think about what sorts of small signs we can put up to let people outside of our community know that they are welcome there.
That's really helpful, I think, because I think we a lot of times feel like in order to draw in new people, we've got to like make these really big changes. But it can start with really simple, easy, small steps. Like that's not that hard, putting a rainbow flag up, and that's like that could happen tomorrow. So like, but because I think there is at St. Paul's, there is this subtlety. It's kind of like we do our Christian work subtly, and there's a gift and a charism with that. But it's like, okay, but there's a way to be subtle in a way that's still like welcoming and outgoing, and kind of is attractive as well. I think that's really helpful advice to pass on.
You're so much more thoughtful than me. I was going to say, if you're standing in front of a man and you don't know his name, it's probably Steve. That's been my experience at St. Paul's. You're not sure, it's probably Steve. Hi, Xander.
That's right. That's right. And speaking of another guest, we've got Alexander, the cat.
He has been at probably more services than a lot of people since March. And I give a lot of credit to Dan's preaching, because that's when he comes to sit on laps, is during the sermon. But he's been a remarkably faithful congregant.
Yes.
We had the blessing of the pets a couple weeks ago, and when I was posting to the family group, like, hey, like come to the services, I accidentally copied the one from the previous week, and people were like, can we bring pets to church this week too? I was like, yeah, sure. Nobody did. But definitely virtually. In my one parish in California, people would bring their dogs in. I don't think we ever served them the Eucharist, but they would come up to the table, and so it's like, oh, this is California. It was great.
We thought about coming with the blessing of the animals, but Xander is not a great traveler, so.
Oh, my dog Pork Chop's same thing. Just it's a fatal flaw for him. Love everything else, just cannot get in the car.
Yeah.
So no party fouls from Xander.
No. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for your time and your thoughtfulness, and we look forward to following up with the Q&A afterwards.
All right, great.
Thanks, y'all.